we defend the borders of foreign countries, we have to get our act together.
For us to fail to come together and support Ukraine in their ongoing fight for freedom against Russian aggression would be a huge gift to Vladimir Putin.
If you punch me, I punch back. Ron DeSantis has lied in every one of his commercials.
Hi, I'm Scott McFarland in Washington, and welcome to America Decides. They have the potential to be landmark negotiations. For the first time in a generation, the Senate is seeking to successfully overhaul U.S. immigration law. It's an ambitious undertaking, trying to solve one of the thorniest issues in politics and tying that solution to financial aid to Ukraine as it fights a war with Russia. The talks began with urgency and with hopes to cut a deal by the holidays, but that urgency has clearly given way to resignation. It's going to take a while, which means both immigration reform and Ukraine might be put on hold well into 2024, a year in which an election has immigration as a top issue among Republican primary candidates and Republican primary voters. But no matter what happens next, there's already a political impact. By agreeing to negotiate a separate dispute to supply aid for Ukraine, Congress has set a precedent. Future money for the war zone might also get tied up and bogged down in complex negotiations on very unrelated matters. Major Garrett and Ed O'Keefe join us now. Major is CBS News' chief Washington correspondent. Ed is CBS News' senior White House and political correspondent. Ed, we know the Senate negotiators resumed this morning. They're back at it tonight. The White House is involved in all this. Where is this negotiation headed?
It really hasn't changed much, Scott, since the weekend when we know everybody was talking. Well, there's still just a lot of talk. Democratic leaders suggesting there's been progress. Republicans saying they're pleased that the negotiations have continued as seriously as they have. But over the weekend, a handful of them said, we want to have a group meeting, a caucus meeting in January after the break to really go over this to ensure Republicans at least aren't giving away the store. Meanwhile, the White House and Democrats involved in the negotiations are also starting to hear about it from progressives and Latino lawmakers in the party saying, don't give away too much on an unrelated matter. If you're going to debate border security on issues of war funding this year, what's to say next year there isn't some other unrelated matter like abortion policy that has to be negotiated away? Or would the White House even do that? Why are you negotiating over immigration and border policy at a time when, for example, you're standing with voters who are Latino or younger and worried about the issue of immigration, at least on the Democratic side, is not in great shape?
Major, so many of these big things are done against a hard deadline. This is clearly being rushed to a degree, to a deadline. Is that a good sign or an unhealthy sign of where things are?
It's a sign that the White House did not engage as directly as it probably should have a month ago on some of the concessions it now is willing to make on the Republican side of this ledger, Scott, which is all about border security, tightening up the application and approval process for those seeking asylum and detention either in a third country, namely Mexico, or in detention facilities or arrangements here in the United States that are much more like the Trump administration, much less like the current Biden administration. And when you talked about the difficulty historically of working out immigration policy, that's because the left was getting something and the right was getting something, and bridging those gaps were always difficult. I know I've covered that many, many years. This is not about bridging those gaps. This is all about how much on the Republican side is the Biden White House willing to travel and to concede almost entirely on policy matrices decided and articulated by Republicans. That's what's making this all the more difficult, not only to get Republican satisfaction, but tamp down, if possible, restiveness, if not downright opposition on the progressive left.
This is a battle, Ed, that really feels like it's being fought on Republicans' preferred turf. Is there any sense from anybody at the White House they could have or should have gotten involved with this earlier?
Oh, even if they did feel that way, Scott, they'd never say it even privately. This is one of the most stubborn White Houses, maybe, when it comes to negotiating, certainly on this issue, when you have a president who is no fan of having to take up the issue of immigration policy whatsoever. Major suggested that they should have gotten engaged a month ago. Some would argue they should have perhaps engaged in October when the initial ask for border security funding was included in the president's initial funding request. Democrats and Republicans have faulted the White House for that for literally waiting until last week, like most college students do this time of year before they head home to mom for the holidays to finish their term papers. That's exactly what the White House is caught in here now. And, you know, the big goal of the fall for this White House was to get security funding for Ukraine and Israel to ensure that those operations could continue, to meet the president's goal of democracies standing against autocracies and ensuring that American troops are never committed to these two conflicts. They failed, or they failed so far, with the clock ticking, with the House gone for the year. And now they're going to have to somehow save face through January and hope that Republicans, when they get back, are still willing to negotiate as we inch closer to a presidential primary season that's going to put the current president's former and likely future nemesis back on the ballot and talking every day, multiple times a day potentially when he's not in court, about the issue of border security and immigration, as he has in recent days, once again roiling the race by talking about things that certainly anger and upset a lot of people in this country.
Yeah, Major, let's expand on that. Not only is Donald Trump talking immigration, he's using that phrase, poisoning the blood of America when there's immigration to America. I suspect he knows exactly what he's doing, but what do you make of it?
So there is an opening for the former president to be very aggressive in this space. Centrist Democrats know that it's very difficult to go to their district and say we need $61 billion more for Ukraine, but not money or policy changes at our southern border. Even in swing districts, that doesn't really work. Americans, independents, some Democrats, and almost all Republicans want border policy changes. That's a political reality, one that the White House is late in acknowledging, but has acknowledged. That's why these negotiations are going on. For the former president, this creates what appears to be an opening, but not an opening as broad as he has rhetorically taken it. Even those who want tighter border security policies don't want, and there's no indication in our polling at all that suggests people want anyone seeking the presidency of our country to sound like Benito Mussolini, sound like Adolf Hitler, to use any rhetoric that even comes close to that kind of exclusionary and authoritarian language, othering in mass stereotypical language anyone who might come to this country seeking asylum, as the former president does. Yes, does it work with a very core, small part of his base? Probably. But does it work more broadly, and is it something suitable for a general election campaign? It certainly isn't, even though the former president at times indulges the fantasy that it is.
Ed, real quickly, what's the White House reaction to this latest line of rhetoric from Trump?
They called it grotesque and fascist-like, suggesting that it's everything that the United States should not be. And it was the Biden re-election campaign that likened what former President Trump said to Adolf Hitler regarding blood poisoning and whatnot. Also called him out for quoting or standing by Kim Jong-un and Vladimir Putin in those remarks on Saturday night. You'll continue to hear them do that throughout this as necessary, as needed, because, you know, part of the strategy here at the White House is to remind voters, look, it's either me or him. And if you're okay with him, fine. But if you're not, I may be your only and your best option. And so they will call it out as needed. And they believe, ultimately, when the rest of the country starts paying more attention to the election process, because we appreciate and understand that most are not necessarily right now, but when they realize that he is potentially going to be the nominee, whether that's as early as January or whether it takes until March or April, then they believe really the coalition that existed before will start coming back, because they'll realize that it's him again and something they can't support.
I have an extra moment, Major. What do you make of that theory? It seems to be that the coalition will reform that hasn't reformed just yet.
Well, the best way to motivate, mobilize, and activate the 2020 Biden coalition is former President Trump. There's no question about that. In a strange way, former President Trump needs Biden as his political boogeyman, if you will, and President Biden and the coalition of 2020 need Trump as a great uniting force to put many other issues, important though they are, to the back burner because of the sense of, if not mortal threat, near mortal threat that they believe former President Trump presents. Of course, there are those in the Trump coalition who believe President Biden represents a kind of mortal threat. So you have this existential attitude about the future of America. Both campaigns will try to cite that and use that. If 2020 teaches us anything, demographically and otherwise, that there is a net advantage in that 2020 coalition coming together more for President Biden than former President Trump.
Major Garrett in New York, Ed O'Keefe at the White House. Thank you both. An appeals court has rejected Mark Meadows' bid to move his Georgia election interference case to federal court. A move to federal court would have given Trump's former chief of staff a wider jury pool rather than one just from heavily Democratic Fulton County. He's one of the 18 people indicted alongside former President Trump for their efforts to overturn the 2020 election results in Georgia. Meadows has pleaded not guilty to his role in the alleged conspiracy. Former President Trump is ahead of the rest of his rivals in 2 key states. What our new CBS News polling is revealing about the state of the race next on America Decides.
He's very likable. I agree with that. I don't think I'm that bad.
You're likable enough.
Thank you so much.
Welcome back to America Decides. That was then presidential candidate Barack Obama's infamous comment about Hillary Clinton's likability at a debate in New Hampshire in 2008. Today in the Granite State, former President Donald Trump leads the field, but only 36% of GOP voters there describe him as likable. According to a CBS News poll, he also holds a commanding lead in Iowa. CBS News' Executive Director of Elections and Surveys, Anthony Salvanto, joins us now. Anthony, your polling shows a lot, but who is seen as likable or reasonable in the Republican field, and does it at all matter?
Hey there, Scott. Yeah, let's unpack our adjectives here, right? You pointed out at the start, Donald Trump doesn't necessarily do as well on that characteristic, but here's one that he does do well on, right? Being a strong leader. And he sort of laps the field in that. He's got a big lead on that. And look, the point is there are different characteristics that rise at certain times in certain elections, and that's one of them. Here's another one that's behind Nikki Haley's rise, being described as reasonable. And she's got a pretty wide gap on a lot of the other candidates on that. And that's a big reason why she's had such a move from the fall, where she started to consolidate a little bit of that non-Trump vote. But yeah, it's about what people are looking for in that moment, juxtaposed against what they see in the other choices, Scott.
Anthony, it just jumped out at you that somebody who trails in the issue of being reasonable is winning. So what does our polling say about why Trump has such a big lead in Iowa?
Well, there's one of those that I showed you about being described as a strong leader. 2 other things. One is, look at the percent, nearly half of Iowa caucus goers who describe themselves as being part of the MAGA movement. So he's got an almost built-in base there, right? The other part is that they think he can beat Joe Biden and shares their values, among other things. And then let me show you this about Iowa, because this has really been in the news here. Trump's comments about his ideas for deporting undocumented immigrants. Look at the support, and it's strong in both New Hampshire and Iowa, but look at the support for that idea in Iowa. This is one data point, among others, the idea of making abortion illegal, the idea that there's a lot of these conservative, a lot of these right-leaning voters who are there that kind of matches up with the rhetoric and the things that the former president is talking about. Iowa is often the more conservative, more right-leaning state, but then you see some of these policies where it really lines up, Scott.
Both Iowa and New Hampshire, is this immigration issue disproportionately important? It's just one of the issues, but it seems like it coincides with the leader in the polls.
Yes, it is. It is very important. Republican voters in both places put this way at the top of the list. Yes, the economy is important. Yes, finding somebody who can beat Joe Biden is important. But immigration and the border in particular has stood out throughout this process, throughout this campaign, as something that's sort of a must-have agreement for these Republican primary voters, Scott.
Excellent work in New York, Anthony Salvanto. We thank you very much. Texas Governor Greg Abbott has signed a bill making it a state crime to enter Texas illegally. It's considered one of the harshest immigration bills in U.S. history and is expected to face legal challenges before it takes effect in March. The new law would give Texas law enforcement the ability to arrest and jail people on illegal entry charges. It also allows judges to issue deportation orders of who they suspect to be violators. The gloves are off between Ron DeSantis and Nikki Haley in the battle to become the top Trump alternative. We take you to the Hawkeye state for the latest on their campaigns. As we continue, you're streaming America Decides. Welcome back to America Decides. We're just 4 weeks away from the Iowa caucuses. And while former President Donald Trump holds a commanding lead in the state, Nikki Haley and Ron DeSantis find themselves in a war of words. Here's some of what we heard in Iowa earlier today.
And if you punch me, I punch back. Ron DeSantis has lied in every one of his commercials. They've been fact-checked.
There's a real risk that she would send American troops to Ukraine to fight. And look, as the only veteran in the race, that is not in our interest.
CBS News campaign reporters Nydia Cavazos and Aaron Navarro join us now in what is clearly a tropical paradise. Nydia is following the Haley campaign, Aaron is following the DeSantis campaign, and they're wearing their winter clothes as is advised. Aaron, let's start off with the issue of Ron DeSantis stumping with Congressman Tom Massie of Kentucky. Why is that important and why is that potentially controversial?
Scott, that's how we know the Iowa caucus is getting closer, when it gets colder, but the attacks are getting hotter. The Governor DeSantis and Haley had really been lobbing attacks at each other in the past couple of weeks beyond the debate stage. And the latest came this weekend from Nikki Haley's campaign, where they alleged that Thomas Massie, a congressman that can maybe take some pretty controversial votes, as you know, covering Capitol Hill, Scott, and saying that he is the most anti-Israel Republican in Congress. Take a listen to what Nikki Haley had to say in Iowa.
Ron DeSantis, who says Ukraine's a territorial dispute and that this is Israel's war, not America's war, turns around and brings in a Republican into Iowa that is the most anti-Israel Republican there is, who voted with the squad.
And I asked Massie and DeSantis, who were campaigning together in Iowa this past Saturday, about Haley's campaign and the comment that they made about Massie. Take a listen to what Massie and DeSantis had to say. Nikki Haley's campaign actually went after Governor DeSantis yesterday, and they called you the most anti-Israel Republican in Congress. Given some of your votes, some of the things you said about AIPAC, things like that, can you kind of address that?
Well, first of all, let me say, I agree with Ron DeSantis on about 85% of the things. And you can go back and look at our votes. We didn't think alike on foreign policy, right? I'm here to support him because I know what's in his heart. I know he's like the smartest guy I ever met in Congress. There's no close second, okay? And so I'm supporting him as a person, and we're going to have policy differences.
Look, Massie is one of DeSantis' friends when he was in Congress, but DeSantis later on in that answer said, we may not agree when it comes to foreign policy, and DeSantis made it clear that he is pro-Israel, but he thinks him and Massie have enough in common that they can campaign and advocate for a different person to represent the party for the White House.
Nydia, obviously Nikki Haley is trying to grow her base of support. I'm wondering how enthusiastic her base of support is. What are you hearing from Haley potential voters?
Yes, well, voters here in Iowa very much know that they have less than 30 days to make up their minds and stand behind a candidate. Many say, Iowa here, according to the latest polls, according to even CBS latest poll on Sunday, shows that Trump continues to be the front runner. He continues to lead and historically lead here in Iowa. But here in Iowa, what I'm getting from the ground is that while Trump continues to lead, a lot of voters are also very much tired of the drama. They're tired of the drama that comes with Donald Trump. And though they say they very much support his policies, they've supported him in the past, they're looking around to see if there's another candidate who will sort of resemble his policies, but without the drama. And in this case, many voters are attending Nikki Haley's campaign events. And what I often hear is that they're sort of still deciding between Nikki Haley, Ron DeSantis, and Trump. But let's take a listen and see what they had to say.
But I'm certainly leaning in support towards Ambassador Haley. I think her experience as a governor and also her foreign policy experience she gained by being the United Nations ambassador is a great combination.
I think Trump, I think what he's doing or what he will do is great. Right now, though, I'm not fully 100% for him. That's why I'm kind of here today, just trying to expand my horizons.
I've heard a lot of stuff about her. I've been supporting her for a while now, but to put a face to the name and, really see how she's going to, clean up the country.
You know, and border issues here in Iowa continue to be very much of importance to voters. They say that they want border security. And according to the latest CBS poll, it also shows that the majority of the GOP likely caucus goers here in Iowa and also for New Hampshire, they very much support mass deportation. So that gives you a sense of where voters stand. And though a lot of them have been supporting Trump in the past, they say they're tired and they're looking around, and we'll see what they have to say on January 15th.
Aaron, it's clear Ron DeSantis is making a large-scale bet in Iowa. I'm wondering, though, over the past few days, the past couple of weeks on your reporting, if this is a make-or-break state to him now.
It does feel like it's getting closer to that. From talking to state legislators that support DeSantis, strategists both in D.C., Texas, and Florida, they think that for DeSantis to have a good night, he has to create the political earthquake of maybe beating Trump here in Iowa, or at least coming within 10 points at a close second. They say if the polls kind of borne out and the gap between him and this Trump is still there, the path for argument for a viable, path to the nomination just looks more and more murky. And when you look beyond Iowa at New Hampshire and South Carolina, these are states that Nikki Haley right now at this moment is polling much better than DeSantis in. It really is becoming, the stakes are really getting higher for DeSantis in Iowa, and that's why he's putting so much focus, has invested so much time, and has really deployed a good ground game here, according to Republicans I've talked to.
Nydia, let's talk about those New Hampshire numbers. What's the reaction inside the Haley campaign to what is, relatively speaking, a strong set of New Hampshire numbers?
Yes, definitely. It is strong, and these latest numbers show that Nikki Haley continues to gain momentum in New Hampshire. And while New Hampshire is a state that, again, Trump continues to lead, what the polls revealed is that Haley is gaining ground on Trump. She's seen as a candidate that is likable, that is prepared, and that is much more reasonable than former President Donald Trump. And these numbers to her favor actually come just after Nikki Haley had a big week here in New Hampshire after Governor Sununu endorsed her. And so we definitely do see this enthusiasm within her crowds. We see the support. And this is a stark contrast to Iowa, where we tend to see a lot of people at her events. They tend to be undecided. But in New Hampshire, they're standing behind her. And also, I want to add in that what also explains and adds up to Nikki Haley's success in New Hampshire is that New Hampshire's primary is also open to independents. So this explains why we continue to see a lot of independents and even Democrats standing behind Nikki Haley at her events.
Just a few seconds left, Nydia. What are you expecting the week ahead from the campaign?
Nikki Haley is going to be campaigning here in Iowa. She's increased the amount of events that she's going to be having. Typically, we would see 1 to 2 events, and now we're seeing that there's 10 events within a 5-day swing. So this is before her team breaks for the holidays, and so we can definitely expect that either she's going to be back in Iowa or New Hampshire to continue to gain on Donald Trump.
Aaron, quickly, what do you have the week ahead with Governor DeSantis?
Iowa. It's all Iowa before Christmas, after Christmas, up until January 15th. That's really what we're expecting from the Florida governor as he really banks his campaign and path to the potential White House here in Iowa.
Looks like you both have a rocking chance at a white Christmas there. Nydia Cavazos, Aaron Navarro, thank you both. That does it for today. You can stream America Decides Monday to Thursday at 5 p.m. Eastern. You're streaming CBS News.